Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first AppSheet Office Hours event of the year. If this is your first session, welcome. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. It's great to have you here with us today. I see many of you have already dropped notes into the chat, so it's great to see you joining us. We love to see where you're tuning in from around the world. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Rachel, who will be taking us through the content and answering your questions today. So before handing it over to Rachel, just a few quick reminders that questions are encouraged. So feel free to drop those into the chat and we'll be sure to get to them either in the chat or at the end of the presentation. And for any questions that we don't get to, please use the AppSheet community and someone from the community or the AppSheet team will be happy to help you out. And the link to that community is in the YouTube description. So feel free to check that out. All right, with that, we have a lot of content to get through today. So Rachel, I will hand it over to you to get us started.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lauren. And hello, everyone. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Rachel. I'm a product manager here at AppSheet. And I'm really excited to be talking to you about what we've been working on the admin team, the admin capabilities that we have available over the last year or so, some best practices for how to get your, let's call it your, I was going to say your governance, but sort of more generally, your administration of AppSheet as a whole set up for success, and the tools that we provided to help you do that. I also wanted to say congratulations on making it to the end of the longest January ever. Happy February 1st, maybe February 2nd for some of you, depending on your time zone. And if you're watching the replay, today is the first day of the end of the longest day of January. So hello, everyone. So with that in mind, let's jump in. I have a bit of an agenda here, an overview of what we're going to be talking about. As I mentioned right at the outset, we'll talk about sort of AppSheet governance as a whole, AppSheet administration as a whole, what it is, why you should do it, some strategies for setting yourself up for success. We'll talk about the tools that we've been working on over the last year or so that help make those things hopefully a little bit easier and more straightforward. We will do a little bit forward-looking insights as well in agenda item 3. So not too much detail there. I can't share too much about the features that we're working on right now, but we'll put some info in there about that. And then at the end, as Lauren mentioned, we'll have time for questions as well as some next steps and resources. So without any further ado, jumping in, AppSheet governance, why, how, what? So I think the thing I want to mention right at the outset is, although, as I mentioned several times already, we do provide a good number of tools and strategies for setting your AppSheet implementation up for success when it comes to the administrative capabilities that you need as an administrator or oversight you need of your teams. AppSheet does a lot for you already. AppSheet does a lot for you out of the box because AppSheet is secure by design. It has end-to-end encryption. We have built-in encryption that allows apps to be really securely accessed anywhere from any device. We're in the cloud. We're cloud native. We are updated across the globe. There's no need for patching. Everything is constant, up to date, exactly what it needs to be for you to have the most secure, successful implementation. And as I mentioned, we're cloud first, powered by Google Cloud. We really offer that browser-based approach that's trusted by enterprises everywhere. So what does that mean? Well, AppSheet is, as you know, a tool for accelerating digital transformation for everyone everywhere, from frontline offices to back office knowledge workers. We can provide you connectivity to all sorts of data sources. We can give you a chat UI. We can give you a desktop UI. We can give you a docs UI recently. You can add your AppSheet apps and docs. You can automate your workflows. You can really get integration with all of your workspace tools, if not sort of extra workspace tools or outside of workspace tools as well. We let anyone within an organization or anyone allowed within an organization to create applications and front ends on data sources that really run critical business data. And that's great. That's super exciting for the citizen developers and for the team members and for the people that actually need to create those processes from the get-go. But it can be really, really, really terrifying when you think about this perspective from the perspective of an IT administrator or someone concerned about quote unquote shadow IT, or what's happening when my team everywhere is accessing my critical business data sources and building front ends on it and maybe sharing that data. That can feel scary. And it is IT's responsibility to manage that. The emotional side of it is fear, but the business side of it is risk, to manage that risk. So we want to empower employees, IT and organizations as a whole want to empower employees, it's a bit of a tongue twister, with the tools that they need to help people help themselves, to create the solutions to the processes that work best for them, to address a wide variety of use cases, to not have to replicate critical business data in a separate data source, to actually sort of get things at the source. But again, to do so in a way that doesn't introduce undue risk or introduce risks that might be sort of outside of the scope of what IT is aware of or able to take on. So what does AppSheet do about this? How do we empower citizen developers? How do we empower anyone to create the process solutions that they need and do it in a way that's not utterly terrifying for IT administrators or folks focused on security, governance, compliance, and so on and so forth? Well, as you may or may not know, depending on how familiar with AppSheet you are, there are sort of three key roles in AppSheet as a no-code environment. Those are admins, app creators, and app users. And each of these people, each of these roles has a role in keeping AppSheet safe and keeping the use of AppSheet in compliance with the needs and the wants of IT, as well as the needs and the wants of the individual creators, citizen developers who want to build native solutions for themselves. So admins are responsible for overseeing the organization. They define access to data, app functionality usage. App creators are the people who build the apps within the purview or within the scope of what admins have sort of said they can do, have said they are allowed to do. And app users are the people who actually end up using those apps. And each of those three roles have things that they can and should do to ensure that AppSheet functions within the parameters of what feels appropriate, what is allowed within the horizon of IT's scopes. So app creators can manage their individual users' access and access to data for their apps. App creators get to control who their app is shared with and what those users can do with those apps. They get to filter the data actually directly within the app via slices or even with security filtering. They can also control app usage and actually the data access on the data source itself, and they can monitor app usage from in AppSheet monitoring capabilities. And you see a screenshot of one of those things here. We'll talk more about things coming up in the future here as well. So that's the role of app creators. Admins can control the entire ecosystem. So not just the individual apps that they create, but the entire ecosystem. And what that ecosystem is has changed a little bit over the last year. So I want to talk about that. But very broadly, they can control the entire ecosystem of where AppSheet or where their organization's AppSheet apps are being created. They can define teams. Teams are groupings of users, so they can define who's in those teams. They can define what those teams can do via policies. And they can also monitor and control not just what's happening at the individual app level, but at the team level as well. So I want to talk about how to set your AppSheet implementation up for success in sort of 3 key steps. We'll talk about those 3 key setup tasks. And if you've already done this because you're up and running with AppSheet and you're looking forward to talking about the features that we've been working on for the last year, great. Take this as an opportunity to test your knowledge and make sure you've done some of these key setup tasks. And if this is new to you, also great. We'll talk through some of the things that you need to think about when setting up a new or sort of reframing an AppSheet implementation to really meet the needs of your enterprise deployment. So 3 key setup tasks. Sorry, I'm also changing slides on another screen. So when I click forward, it doesn't always go forward on the screen. So now I'm here. All right, on the right slide going forward. So the first key setup task is to define teams and roles. Very quickly, what is a team? as I mentioned, a team is the group of AppSheet users who are within an organization. And notice that's a lowercase o organization. The team, within a team, these are all the people that can sort of access out of the box team shared data sources. They all have team level policies applied to them. They can see apps definitions for sample apps that are shared with the team. As an admin, you can define team membership based on sort of 3 different things. If you are a workspace customer, the first 2 are the ones that we see most often here, and in fact are the strategies that we recommend most. Either by defining a team membership as your entire workspace organization, so your whole workspace organization is one team, or what we see most often in sort of highly governed or strategically governed organizations are using Google Groups as memberships for teams. So you create Google Groups, those Google Groups power into AppSheet to create the teams that you see there. So I'll talk more about both of these in an upcoming slide or 2 here as well, but at a high level, those are the 2 things we recommend and we see most for workspace customers. We also, though, support non-workspace customers. And if you don't use Workspace or you use Workspace in addition to other authentication sources, you can use an external authentication domain to get the data about who your users are into AppSheet and then use authentication groups within AppSheet to group those users into discrete teams. You may see that you may see that model referred to or hear me refer to it in this presentation moving forward as domain-based teams, but that's what that is. It's using an external authentication domain to create your teams. So there are kind of, once you sort of have your team created or you know how you're going to get your users into AppSheet and structured into teams, there are 2 models for how those teams themselves can be structured and how the users within those teams get roles or the hierarchy of roles assigned within those teams. Now, out of the box, you get what's called the standard model. That's what you see on the left-hand side of the screen here. I think it's the left-hand side of the screen here, but the one that says standard model. And it is sort of the team unto itself. The team is the top level structure. A team has a root admin that is the sort of owner of the team, is the head of that team. There's one root admin for each team. There are team admins. There can be several team admins within a team. They can do things like set policies, but they cannot, for instance, delete the team if they wanted to, or transfer apps within users of the team. And then within that, underneath the root admin and team admin, you have app creators, you have app users, and those are the people actually doing the work within the team. Although, the admins can as well, but they are more of the creator editor role. So that's the standard model. Policies apply to all creators, users, and apps by default, although you can make this a little bit more specific if you want with actually custom callouts within the policies themselves. Now, if you are a workspace customer, we, in the last year, have introduced what we're calling AppSheet organizations or AppSheet team hierarchy. And what this does is it adds a top level on top of teams. It adds an umbrella, a grouping mechanism on top of a bunch of teams within your parent workspace organization. So you could imagine that if you have, going back a slide here, if you've used Google Groups to create a bunch of AppSheet teams, if you just manage them with this standard out-of-the-box model, you will have individual admins for each of those teams. Those teams will have their own sets of policies, own sets of settings, what have you, that you might want to control at the individual team level, but there isn't a point of central oversight. The organization model does that. It gives you an umbrella over all of those teams and groups them together so that not only do you have this overarching structure, you also have organization admins, so sort of top level admins on top of that. And I will call out again that this is something that's currently available specifically to workspace customers. And I did see a question in the chat here, which I'm sort of seeing in my peripheral vision around, can I specifically call out where a different AppSheet license is required to access the feature? So I'll try and do that as much as I can moving through this part and the feature focus later on. But while we're on it right now, AppSheet organizations like you see here are a feature of AppSheet Enterprise. So if you wanted to get the organization model, you would need to have that one. Okay. So next thing here. So going through our key setup tasks, we have put a check mark next to number 1. We've talked about defining team roles, defining team structure. We talked about creating domain-based teams or group-based teams or whole workspace-based teams, organizing them in either the standard model or the organizations model. The next thing we're going to do when we're setting up our AppSheet administration model for success is establish policies. Policies are really the guardrails that admins set up for what their users can do within their AppSheet deployment. So let's talk about what those things are. A quick overview on AppSheet policies. I might have said this at a high level, but looking at it in a little bit more detail, they really allow you to shape the deployment, development, and usage choices of your app creators and app users. So policies can be things like all users must sign in before they can use an app, or only certain data sources can be used when creating an app. They can be applied on domains, they can be applied on features, policies can be applied on data sources, policies can also be applied on individual apps. And we have a lot of policy templates out of the box. So you don't have to start from scratch when going forth and creating your new policy plan for what your organization, how your organization should be governed. You can see on the screen here a bunch of the policy templates we have available out of the box. You can select any one of these in the AppSheet administration UI, and you would be able to sort of get this up and running with a single click. You can also, though, customize policies. You can either customize a templated policy and make it work a little bit differently than you got directly from selecting the template, or you can create your own from scratch. And you can see a little bit of that here. I'm not going to go into too much detail of it here, but if you go to the AppSheet Help Center, you will find a very detailed article on exactly all of the things, precisely all of the things within apps and within AppSheet that you can control via policies, hooks, if you will, into what can be controlled via policies. So take a look at that if that's something that's interesting to you. The last thing we see users want to do and admins want to do when getting themselves set up for success with an administration model is set up monitoring to really be aware of what's going on within the scope of their purview. So I say that a little bit broadly because the scope of their purview could be their entire organization, or just their team, or maybe even just a few apps that they care about most specifically. But set up monitoring to understand what app creators are doing, as well as manage requests for things like app ownership change. So admins can do things like download and view and download reports of application usage. You see a screenshot of that here. They can see information about app listings by owner, view detailed app usage information for each of those apps, including how many monthly users each of them have, what some of the security statuses are around those apps, where security means sort of login authentication requirements or not. You can see a little bit more of that here on the screen. And I'm going to flip through this relatively quickly because what I want to show simply by showing these slides is that there are a lot of views available to you as an admin, and specifically to you as a team admin. The screens we're seeing here are things that are available to team admins. You don't have to be an organization admin to see this information about what's going on your team. The other thing you can do if you do have AppSheet Enterprise is start to export some of your audit log activities for your apps within your teams to BigQuery. And we see a lot of our large enterprise customers do this. They set up a BigQuery audit log export. They get near real time. I think it's within 90 seconds or so, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, I think is the threshold that we're running with right now, exports of audit log activity directly to BigQuery. And then we also see them build somewhat robust reports in other tools like Looker Studio on top of those BigQuery exports to get a really detailed view of exactly what's happening within their organizations. So while there are some built-in reporting capabilities, and we saw some of those screens on the last few slides, we see folks take the BigQuery audit log export to, Looker Studio or wherever you do your data analysis route for really the sort of custom reporting that your individual organization needs. So that's one to be aware of as a feature too. All right, I think I skipped a slide. Nope, I didn't. Okay, so next thing here, or last thing I should say, the other thing that that admins can do, team admins specifically, and team root admins, is that they can request applications to be transferred to service accounts or to another application creator, or transfer all apps from one creator to another. And what that really means is that team roots and root admins as a whole can really manage the entire lifecycle of applications and of users within their teams. So I think to sum it up just a little bit, and I'll skip ahead for just a second, and I'll go back to the slide in a second. To sum it up, the things that we recommend doing around setting up monitoring are not just understanding what's happening within a team or within an organization, but also starting to think about what your entire application lifecycle looks like and your entire user lifecycle looks like for folks within AppSheet. And we do give admins the capabilities to do so. Going back just a second here, if you are a Workspace customer, you can also do some of this directly from the admin console. So Workspace admins can see which users are running AppSheet by running the user report in Workspace Admin Console, and we have the file path on the screen here. So you'll also get some of that information there as well, and you can start to combine the information you get from AppSheet and the information you get from Workspace. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water and pause before we talk about what's next. Cool. So we just went through at a pretty fast rate some high-level ideas around things you might want to do to set up your administration of AppSheet for success, very broadly. I did touch on a couple of things that have changed in the last year, features that we've released or capabilities that we've put forth and are going to continue to work on moving forward. So this next section here is where I'm going to focus on those things and focus on the differences and the things that maybe I didn't cover in that high-level overview. So what's new? What have we been working on for the last year or so? The first one I want to call out before we get into anything else about what's new with AppSheet or what's been going on the administration side is that sort of mid last year, we included AppSheet Core with more AppSheet or with more Google Workspace editions. I hesitate to say, I was almost going to say all Workspace editions. It's not all Workspace editions. It's most of them. But it does mean that more Workspace users than ever do have access to AppSheet, but specifically AppSheet Core. And AppSheet Core is different than AppSheet Enterprise, as the name implies. But I think one of the main differences that is relevant for our conversation here today is that AppSheet Core comes with sort of a bundle, if you will, of governance and security and compliance and management tools. And those are largely unconfigurable or non-configurable. So if you turn on, as you see in the screen here, AppSheet Core Security, you get a set of security guardrails, if you will, out of the box with this. You can also turn them off if you don't want them and you find them not useful for your implementation. But that's what comes for AppSheet Core. So we want to make sure AppSheet Core users can use AppSheet within their organizations and feel secure doing so. That's why Core Security exists. However, if you want additional flexibility or you want customization into some of the things we're going to talk about moving forward, you will need an AppSheet Enterprise subscription to do so. So the vast majority of the things I'm going to talk about moving forward do require an AppSheet Enterprise subscription. If and when they don't, I will try and call them out. But if I miss that, please, if one of my co-attendees here, or co-hosts, co-helpers here, see something I missed, please call it out in the chat. Cool. Okay. So, oh, look, I even had a slide about it. Yes, most admin features require AppSheet Enterprise. So that's the slide. All right, so what's new? I'm going to go through what's new in the same layout, same format that we just did for the setup tasks. So we'll talk about what's new with teams and roles. We'll talk about what's new with policies, and we'll talk about monitoring as well. First thing, team management. This is that organization feature or AppSheet organization, org admin, team management, comes with all of these names that we saw a few minutes ago. So before the concept of organizations existed within AppSheet, only that standard model existed. the top level of sort of who could control what, who could govern what, was the team root. And we found that that wasn't the most effective way for especially organizations that want sort of central oversight and central management. It wasn't the most effective way for them to get that, because you could only have one team root, and you needed to sort of trust your individual team admins or roots of other users, roots of other teams, if you will, to set up the policies that you need. So we've been working for a long time on this idea of organization hierarchy, team management. And we rolled it out sort of middle of last year. And it does two main things at this point, and we're continuing to add on more functionality. But it really is most useful for two main things right now. The first is team management, as it says on the slide here. So organization admins can not only configure teams, configure groups or teams within their organization, and you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen that, or I guess it's sort of the center of the screen, you can see that this organization contains a parent org as well as a couple of different types of teams. They can also see all the users in those teams. They can see what those users are doing. And very importantly, the organization admins can set the role of any user within their teams, or really within their organization as a whole. So I, as an organization admin, can make this user anything. I can make them another organization admin, or I can make them a team root, I can make them admin, I can make a member, so on and so forth. And that makes it much easier for admins of any kind to feel like they have the oversight they need. And in fact, to truly have the oversight they need of what's happening within their teams, create those teams, make them look like they need them to. So here's a slide that shows a little bit more detail on that organization admin feature. Because I think I'm doing okay on time, I actually want to show this live on my screen here. So I'm gonna go to a quick screen share and hope that everything works as I intend it to. And instead of looking at the screenshot version of this slide, we'll just look at it live on my screen here. Yep, there it is. Cool. So this is the actual live screen that I took a screenshot of to put on this slide, but let's just see it in action. This is the view of an organization. You can see here, I can click on the little globe item, and this is now showing me every single team within this entire AppSheet organization. So it doesn't matter what team these individual users are on, I will see them all listed here, and I can scroll through, or I can also search for a user. If I want to, though, I can actually click through the individual teams that I have as part of this organization. So this top one is the entire workspace account-based team. If you remember a few minutes ago, we talked about there's a couple different ways to create teams. One of them is based on your entire workspace organization. That's what you see here. I also, within this organization, have group-based teams. I have 3 group-based teams, and I can see them listed here as I click through them. It looks like they don't have a lot of people in them, but these groups would show all of the users within those individual teams. So now, as an org admin, I can see everyone within every team within my org, and if I want to, I can change people's roles. So if I come over here, I can come and select this user, and I can make this user an organization admin if I would like. Or if I say, actually, that's not what I meant to do, I can go back and I can just make them a root. And I can just change that because I am an organization admin myself directly from this interface. I can see the number of apps they've created. I can see when they were last active, so on and so forth. Okay. The other thing I can do as an organization admin is I can delete teams. I'm not going to do that because that will sort of send this team into disarray, and we do use this team to do lots of interesting things, but I could in fact delete this team, and we'll go to a group-based team, which will be a little bit better to show. I could in fact delete this team here if I wanted to do so. Again, not going to do it, but organizations do have that capability. If I want to add new teams, I can do that here. I can add a team from a Google group. So you'll see that drop down available to me right here. And if I click on it, it will send me through the typical auth domain configuration setup step, so on and so forth, that I would see if I was trying to connect that. So going back a step here, let me quickly see what I was next going to show on my slides, because if it's what I think it is, I'm just going to stay in my live demo view here. Where are my slides? Let's see. Lauren, can we go back to the slide deck? Thank you. Okay, cool. So let's talk about this for just a second. And we'll stay on the slides instead of going back to the demo. So what we just saw was the organizations feature. And the organizations feature, importantly, requires a workspace account. It requires you to be a workspace user because your top level AppSheet organization is tied to your primary workspace domain. Now, a lot of customers, especially larger customers, or really customers of any size, have more than one workspace domain. They have their primary workspace domain, then they have secondary domains. Maybe you have a test dot, or you have a affiliate company that you know is fully owned, a subsidiary. For whatever reason, you have secondary domains. Previously, those secondary domains would have been treated as external to your AppSheet account. And when I say secondary domains, I mean secondary domains as configured as secondary directly within Workspace. So previously they would have been considered external, and if you wanted them to be treated as internal, for example, in a policy that restricts access or controls access to external apps or apps created by external domains, if you wanted them to be treated as internal, you would need to actually go into each of those policies and sort of write an exception out for those individual domains, which is fine, but it's time consuming and it requires an admin to be aware of every time the status of a secondary domain changes, or a new secondary domain comes in, or a new user needs to be added in, or what have you. And that's a lot of mental and physical overhead that we don't want to put on our admins. So one of the other things that we released for organizations is secondary workspace domain support. So AppSheet now treats all users on secondary workspace domains as configured within the workspace admin console side of the world. It treats those as primary. So you no longer have to stay on top of those things and you know, have I added the right domain to my right allow list for the right team for the right policy? We'll handle all of that for you. So that's a nifty little quality of life improvement. The other thing that we've been working on in the past year, more than a year, is our expansion to the EU region, to the AppSheet EU region. So what this means officially is that sort of later last year, we released support for data residency within EU. So if you want your AppSheet data to reside in the EU, you can now do that. You can contact us and we will enable this feature for you, and you will then have the option to either be all EU all the time, so you run fully out of the EU, or your users can switch back and forth based on the domain that they go to. This is also an enterprise feature, and you'll see on these slides, it does say AppSheet Edition availability for where you can get access to this. But if you're familiar with how Workspace does data residency within the EU, or how Cloud does data residency, the model we use here at AppSheet is a little bit more similar to the Cloud model, the Google Cloud model. So it is a pretty concrete separation between things that are stored in the EU and things that are stored globally. So that's a useful one if you are based in the EU or you want your data to live there. Okay, next category, things with policies. What's new with policies? We've been doing a lot of work here. So I want to talk through this one. And this is another one that I actually want to show on my screen. So Lauren, if we can go back to the screen share, I want to talk about policy preview. Great. So one of the things, I'm gonna jump around in my slides a little bit here because I think it makes sense to do so. One of the things that organization admins can do is they can set policies not just at the individual team level. So I'll go to this team and you can see I can set this policy now for the team, but I can also set policies for my entire organization. And I can do that just by clicking on this organization policy button. And once I do that, I can select, let's just select this first template here, acceptable image resolution. Once I do that, I get this new pane that's going to appear on the right-hand side here, hopefully, if the demo gods are with me. Yes, they are. Great. That is going to appear on the right-hand side here that is called Policy Compliance Preview. And what this does is it allows you to see when you are setting a policy or configuring a new policy or updating an existing policy, it allows you to see what's going to happen when you click Save. So I can see that if I choose to implement this acceptable image policy or acceptable image resolution policy, that all of my apps that I already have are compliant. So none of these apps are going to break if I go and choose to save this policy right now. Let's go back and choose a different one. If I instead go here and say, let's choose this one, enforce FedRAMP compliance. If I choose this one, I will probably see that, yep, here we go. Some of my apps, all of my apps, in fact, will have non-compliant behaviors if I choose to go ahead and save this policy. Now, because this policy is set to error versus just warn, meaning it'll error, it won't work if we hit up a policy compliance versus the user will just get a warning with a policy compliance issue. Because it's set to error, it tells me here that saving this policy will result in these apps becoming unavailable. Now, if I change this to warning, it will tell me that the apps might end up working differently than I expect. So I get a little caution sign here instead of the full error. So it tells me I'll warn app creators when they edit an app. So what this policy preview does, this policy compliance preview does, is it allows you as an admin, or really a policy setting user as a whole, because a user will see this whether or not they're setting policies at the org level or the team level, or even policies for their individual account. It allows a policy setting user to understand what's going to happen when they create a new policy or they edit a new policy. It's also sort of an off-label usage of this is an interesting way to see which of your existing apps are compliant or not compliant with something you're considering implementing. So you're not planning on setting this policy, but you do want to know sort of what's going on with my apps or any of my apps using this functionality that, I'm not sure how it's being used within my org. I can run it through this org policy preview and get a sense for which apps are doing it. So that's a fun little side usage case for the policy preview. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel here. So we just talked about policy preview. We very briefly touched on setting organization policies, but I'm going to dive into that just for one more moment here. If I, as an organization admin, this is also a new feature, if I, organization admin, choose to set a policy at the organization level, let's just choose this one here. The policy that I set as an organization admin, I know it's an org level policy because it says org level policy, and I'll also see that the number of apps here is equal to the entire number of apps in my organization. If I set this policy, every single app on every single team, or maybe a better way of saying it is every single team will also have this policy in effect for them. So generally speaking, we recommend that if you have the organization's feature enabled, set your top level. This can never be changed. It is a truth and should be a truth forever and always. Set those policies at the organization level. And then if there are sort of individual team or individual department differences that need to be implemented, don't set those at the org level. Let your team admins set them at the team level. Or you can go in as an org admin and set those policies at the team level. Because again, as an organization admin, you do have that ability. You can set it for the whole team, or for the whole org rather, you can set it for individual teams, so on and so forth. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about while I'm still showing live on my screen here is, let's use this one, that's going to be better. That if you haven't been in here recently, you may notice that here in the stage section of defining a team policy, there's a new option. And that new option is in fact appearing as the default for most of the policy templates that I just selected. That new stage is called Enforce Always. So before sort of mid last year, there were only two policy stages. There was check on app edit and check on deployment. What that means is that if I selected check on app edit, for example, this policy, only users from a specified domain, would only be checked when an app was edited, when an app was synced. So if I created this policy, if I launched this policy, deployed this policy after a bunch of apps had already been created, those apps wouldn't be checked against that policy until they were next edited or until they were next synced. And that meant that I could wind up in a state where I had a policy that I thought was in effect for all of my apps, but it actually wasn't applying to all apps because some of the older apps hadn't met the stage check for the policy to apply to them moving forward. And that's not great. That's not how we want policies to act in some cases. And it doesn't represent sort of the zero trust is the wrong way to say it, but it doesn't represent the most secure perspective on how to ensure your policies are in effect for everyone, which is why we introduce this enforce always stage. So what this does is it checks policies. It introduces a check on save. So every time an app is saved, the policy will be checked. And that means that for apps, even apps that aren't edited often, they will meet this policy check threshold much sooner, and they will come into compliance much sooner than they did before. So that's the new enforce always stage. It is also, which I sort of alluded to earlier, it has also been set as the new default policy stage for most, if not all, but actually just most of the policy templates. And I realize on my screen share, you can't see the drop down. When I go in here to the policy template, there is in fact a drop down of policies. And maybe Lauren, we can go back to the slides and I can show the slide I have on this so it'll be a little bit more clear. Okay, let's skip ahead because we talked about this live. How do I create and test policy? Enforce always. Yep, there it is. So we talked about enforce always. And as you can see here, here's that drop down. You will find that most of these policies now have enforce always as their stage. So we are always adjusting our stance on the governance tools that we provide to make sure that you have the tools that best regulate your environment as intended. Sort of as a little extra item in here, I didn't create a slide on it, but if you are familiar with this policy template list, you will notice that over the last year or so, we've added a couple new templates to this list here as well. So those include things like disable AppSheet databases, chat apps controls, and you'll see some additional ones coming out in the near future. Okay, we also talked about organization level policies. So I went the live demo route instead of the slide route, which I guess is better. So that's cool. The last thing I want to talk about here before we move on to the sort of official Q&A part of this is it's not fully a feature of AppSheet, but it's certainly great to have, and we are so grateful that we do, is the AppSheet Help Center. We have been putting a lot of time and effort into improving the help resources that we have. And so if you haven't been there recently either, it's a good idea to check back with the Get Started section, and specifically the Get Started for Admins section. We've sort of reorganized things to be a little bit less of here's some information, put it in whatever order you want, and to be a little bit more, here are the steps that we recommend taking in this order in order to set your admin capabilities up for greatest effect. So take a look at that. You will also see that down at the bottom there, it looks like it got cut off in the screenshot, but there are links, and I think I see them in the chat as well. There are now training courses as well for getting your AppSheet account set up as an administrator, and some benefits there. Thank you. Some pro tips there, some best practices for using team hierarchy. You'll also find, and maybe we can include the link to the help resources for this too, that we put together some documentation. Some, I won't call them full white papers, but white paper-like experiences around best practices for setting up admin capabilities for enterprises, best practices for monitoring and management, some how-tos and even some instructions for getting audit logs set up in BigQuery or information set up around what's happening within your organization. So definitely check those out. And I think the team will put links in the chat or on the slides. So grab a hold of those. Okay, so you will notice that I did in fact skip what's new for this last item, setup monitoring. That is by design, because we sort of intentionally didn't make many changes to what's new or to the monitoring tools, monitoring capabilities that we have in the last year or so, but it is one of the main things that we're focusing on moving forward. So that's why it's a segue here into setting up monitoring. Well, let's talk about what's next. And I guess a disclaimer before we go into this in any more detail than we already have. Everything we're talking about here is directional. This is not exactly what you will see or pixel perfect, if you will, but I did want to give everyone a sense for the things that we are thinking about, the direction that we're moving in, and how we are investing in the things that AppSheet admins need. Okay, so this is one I think folks will be very excited about. We are working on a new UI for what it for the world that AppSheet admins spend their time in, a better way to manage AppSheet. We're working on giving admins more capabilities, more visibility, more tools, a cleaner layout, a cleaner UI as a whole for what it means to administer AppSheet, to understand what's going on within your organizations, to look at some of those graphs we saw earlier. So this is blurred out because, directional, but keep an eye out in the coming months, quarters, so on and so forth, for some changes to come to what it looks like in AppSheet to be an AppSheet admin. You'll also see, I guess before moving on to my next slide here, I don't want to discount the work that is being put into this. It's not just changes to what things look like. It's also improvements and additional visibility into specifically what's happening within your organization. And yes, some of that comes from a clearer layout, but also we are planning on adding in additional visibility into things like number of licenses consumed, for instance. So keep an eye out for that moving forward. Okay, the other thing we're working on, or one of the other things we're working on, is continuing to move forward in what it means to administer AppSheet databases, and really what it means to have AppSheet databases connected to your AppSheet account overall. So we launched AppSheet databases last year. We've introduced some governance controls for them and some visibility into, for instance, databases connected. But, excuse me, you will continue to see advancements here over the coming year, and continuing to see the experience of working with and administering AppSheet databases become more and more similar to what it looks like and what it is, in fact, to be an administrator for AppSheet apps as a whole. We also care a lot about organizations. We saw the launch of AppSheet organizations last year as a really exciting one because it gave admins a lot of capabilities that they had been asking for, that they had been needing, that they had been wanting for a very long time. We're going to continue to invest in this area. We are going to continue to build out the capabilities that organizations and organization administrators have within their orgs, within their teams. So keep an eye on this space as well for more. I was going to call them enhancements, but I think I'll be forward and call them improvements to what it means to be an AppSheet admin, and specifically to be an organization admin. Okay, so with that sort of whirlwind overview of what's been going on for the last year and how to maybe use some of those things to set your AppSheet administration paradigms up for success. Oh, it looks like I had this slide twice. I was really excited about it. The help resources, I'm going to skip through because I already talked about it. But with that, I want to skip over to Q&A. And Lauren, thanks for hopping back on here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Rachel, so much for this content. It was amazing. Even the live demos, love to see it. And thank you everyone for sticking with us and for all of your questions. So we are going to dive into Q&A, but before we do that, just a few final reminders and resources. We would love to hear your feedback, and thank you already for sharing some of that into the chat. But you can share it a little bit more formally in our feedback form. We really listen to this and take it into account when we're planning our content and looking at product enhancements. So thank you for that. And we'll drop it into the chat as well for easier access. But just to say thank you, love your feedback, and really appreciate it. And you're all hopefully familiar with the AppSheet community. So that's that first link at the top. And we also have it in the YouTube description. So if we're not able to get to your questions today, that is your go-to place. And we'll be sure to check it out and do our best to help you out there. And you also have access to all of the experts that are in the AppSheet community itself, and they'd be happy to help you out as well. Okay, I know we have a lot of questions coming in, so let's dive right on in. Okay. So our first question that we will pull is, can you integrate my existing Google Cloud IAM groups into AppSheet?
Interesting question. So we do support cloud identity, but I think this question is a little bit different if I am understanding correctly. And I think the most straightforward answer is no. However, there are some touch points within chat apps specifically that leverage GCP and leverage GCP connections, and you will be able to, I should say, configure chat apps using some of your existing GCP configurations. So I think it depends a little bit on what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. But if it's for group creation, no, we don't pull them in directly, but we do use cloud identity. So you may be able to find a leapfrog that way.
Great. And we also did provide some links in the chat as well to help answer that question. So thank you. Awesome. Okay, so some of our questions coming in are around which licenses and access. So let's try to tackle some of those.
Sure.
You may have already covered it, but
yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, first, just kind of off the bat is, can you define what you mean by admins, as it's looking like you're not referring to workspace?
Yeah, that's a great call out. So throughout this presentation, I have almost exclusively meant AppSheet administrators. I think there were maybe one or two times when I said workspace admin, and that's when I specifically meant workspace admin. But I have almost exclusively meant AppSheet administrators. And importantly, an AppSheet administrator is not necessarily a workspace administrator. I think often they are, and in fact, the first domain or first organization admin must also, in fact, be a workspace admin. But besides that one person, that first org admin, it doesn't have to be overlapped. But I think the spirit of this question, if I can say that for just a second, is that it is relatively confusing for especially workspace users to have two different places to manage admin-like things, and AppSheet admins can manage some things in AppSheet, and workspace admins can manage some things about AppSheet in Workspace, but not very much. And where do you go to do one and not the other? So I think the most I can say at this point is we are aware of that challenge, and it also is confusing for us, even working with AppSheet ourselves. So it's something that we're mindful of, and we're looking for ways to improve, and we're hopeful that you'll start to see some changes to what it looks like to be an AppSheet admin, to be a workspace admin, where the overlaps are between those things, or overlaps don't exist between those things, to make it a little bit more clear about how and where and what you can do and who can do these things.
Great. Thank you. Hope that helps. Appreciate the question. So kind of in the same vein, I'm a Google Workspace admin and don't see any of the standard org models in AppSheet. Is this only available with AppSheet Enterprise and not in AppSheet Core available to Workspace?
Yeah, great question. So the organization model is only available as part of AppSheet Enterprise. It is not part of AppSheet Core. And as a workspace customer, you probably have access to AppSheet Core. So to see the organization's feature, organization policy, so on and so forth, you would need to upgrade to AppSheet Enterprise.
All right. And
So
then
what you see, I guess to say that another way, what you see in AppSheet Core is the quote unquote standard model, is the team model.
got it. Thanks for clarifying. So just a few more kind of continuing in this vein.
Yeah.
So our next question is Google Workspace. Who needs the enterprise subscription? Every user of the app or just one admin?
This is an especially, I know I keep saying it's a great question, but this one especially is a one that really catches my eye. So everyone that is accessing enterprise features needs an enterprise subscription. So if you are using an app that has enterprise features, you need to have a license to use that app. That's sort of the AppSheet stance on it. I think that's actually the contract stance on it. So that's the answer, is you have to have a enterprise license to access an enterprise app.
Sounds good. And that might answer this question already, but with Enterprise Standard, is it possible to offer AppSheet apps to our outsourced clients by connecting through our Google Data Lake? And then as a follow-up to that, is there an extra cost for not using the AppSheet database?
So no, there's no extra cost for using AppSheet database. I'll answer the second one first. It's included with AppSheet and with AppSheet Core as well. With Google Enterprise Standard, is it possible to offer AppSheet applications to our outsourced clients by connecting through our Google Data Lake? I don't know. I wish I knew more about Google Data Lake to be able to answer this question. I don't have an answer for you directly, but I would say, I would guess that you would probably need an AppSheet Enterprise subscription, because my assumption is that you would need access to one of the advanced connectors that is only available with AppSheet Enterprise. But maybe we can get back to you on a concrete answer for that one.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Okay, kind of pivoting in a different direction now, but we have, what is the difference between a root and an admin role?
It's a great, yeah, this. So for AppSheet teams, a root is kind of like an organization admin. It is the top level. It can do all of the things. But I think very importantly, there can only be one root admin on any team, but there can be multiple organization admins. So a root admin is the only user who can transfer apps, for instance. There are also some controls around API configuration that are limited to the root admin. A team admin is the person who can set policies at the team level. They can share data sources. They can do sort of all the day-to-day tasks of managing a team or administrating a team. But the root admin can sort of be considered the top level owner of that team. I will say transparently that in the organization model, there is less need and will be increasing need moving forward for a root on every single team. And that's sort of by design. We want the organization admin to be a little bit more like the root admin for the whole group.
Got it. Okay, this question is a little bit more around, user permissions. So prior to this question, they were saying that they are trying to create security filters on specific views to let certain users have access to the full app, with others having limited access. So this is a question around differentiating between different user access.
How can I differentiate between 3 tiers? I currently have 1 tier sharing to a domain with user access, 2 tier sharing to authentication groups with admin access. Sorry, this might be one to take offline. I'm not sure I'm understanding the details of it here. So maybe we can look at the full thread of it, and then we can respond that way.
Yep.
Sorry. I just want to be sure I'm giving a clear answer, because authentication is a tricky thing, and especially not a thing you want to poke around at.
Sounds good. Perfect. Yeah, and with that said, we are coming up close on time, so thank you all for sticking with us. We know there are a lot of questions that we may not be able to get to, and some that are better suited for the community, just to have a little bit more understanding of the context and where you're coming from. So definitely encourage you to use that. But maybe we can take just one or two more. So one question here is around, can we manage what type of AppSheet license a user is assigned based on a policy? And I wonder if that's similar to what the other question was trying to get at. But yeah, any thoughts on this?
Yes and no. So no, there is not a policy to manage license assignment. Yes, it is a thing that we have a lot of requests for, and is a solution. We are working on a solution to make something like this easier and more straightforward. It's probably not going to be a policy, but we know that this is an issue, and especially in an environment where you have a set number of enterprise license and core licenses, you want to make sure people have the things that they need to do their job. So it's something that we're looking at this year.
Great. Okay, I'll take the last one for today. Thank you all. For our AppSheet apps that don't require sign-in, are the enterprise features still available when developed with our enterprise account?
So if you put enterprise features into an app, they will be available to anyone who accesses that app with the enterprise account, whether or not that app requires sign-in. So for instance, if you connect to a quote unquote premium data source, if you don't require sign-in to that app, you still are accessing the premium data source. You're just not requiring sign-in to it. So I think that's my answer.
Awesome. Okay, well, we will drop the link to the feedback form in just a moment. We would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much, Rachel. This was a lot of information to cover, so I really appreciate you diving into it and showing the demos as well to see it in action. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Any final thoughts before we close out today?
No, thank you, everyone, for all the questions. I know we had a ton pre-submitted as well, which is incredibly exciting. And looking forward to hearing more, having more conversations, and thanks for the energy, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. We will see you in the community and at our next office hours or app jam. So appreciate it. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Have a good rest of your day or evening or wherever you are in the world.